Living on drink chlorine. At the last light of money. I've had Chlorine by 21 Pilots stuck in my head for several days now, thanks to this book, and it was worth it. Partly because that song's a bop, but mostly because this book is great. Chlorine is the debut novel by Chinese-American author Jade Song. It's pretty short, at about 220 pages, and it's a coming-of-age story with a massive difference. Kind of reminiscent of the works of author Kaiming Chang, Chlorine is a coming-of-age story that leans into the sapphic, into the queer, and into the surreal. But unlike Kaiming Chang's works, which are intensely surreal from the beginning, Chlorine is a bit more subtle with its exploration of surrealness? Surreality? What's the noun for surreal? Am I stupid? Anyway, the surreal qualities of this book suitably lie beneath the surface for a little while until they don't anymore. The novel was inspired by the author's own experiences as a competitive swimmer, and it tells the story of a young Chinese-American girl who lives in Pennsylvania called Ren Yu. In Mandarin, Ren means human and Yu means fish, and that's her actual name. When she was just a child, Ren's father returned to China, and so she was pretty much raised by her mother, and she spent her adolescent years as a competitive swimmer. She feels a very intense longing for, attraction for, magnetism towards water. She wants to spend all of her time in water, and she dreams of becoming a mermaid. And so we follow her adolescent years, pretty much from the beginning of teenagehood until the end of teenagehood, across 200 pages, and most of that time is spent swimming. This is a coming-of-age story that deals with a lot of different elements, and I would argue that it's pretty up for interpretation. Ren is a swimmer. She's very competitive. She feels the need to achieve something, but really she just loves the water, and as I said, she dreams of becoming a mermaid. She also has a best friend called Kathy, and Kathy has a huge crush on Ren. She is kind of emotionally dedicated to Ren, and early in the book, Ren concedes that if Kathy had ever come forward with her feelings, so we know she doesn't, Ren would have reciprocated. But because she didn't, the two of them end up in relationships with boys. So this is an exploration of puberty and the changes we go through both physically and emotionally, the experimentation, the questioning, the wondering, the search for identity. Coming of age can mean a lot of different things. Here, it is about a person's identity, their personhood, or I guess in Ren's case, fishhood. She's not always a nice person, as teenagers often aren't. She can be incredibly selfish, and there really is a focus on her experiences, what she goes through, what life gives to her, what she wants to take from life. And we experience parts of the novel through Kathy's perspective. 3 or 4 times throughout this novel, Kathy comes into play as a narrator. And Kathy's chapters are written as letters to Ren. And the first letter gives away the fact that at some point in her life, probably pretty soon, Ren is going to actually turn into an actual mermaid and swim off into the ocean, because Kathy's letters are put into bottles and cast out to sea in the hopes that they will reach Ren, and she keeps writing them. So this has to be real. Kathy must know that Ren is now a mermaid, and this is all actually happening. In those letters, she confesses her feelings, she talks about her regrets, and she talks about how much she misses Ren. And then we go back to the main narrative of Ren growing up. And the novel deals with many of the beats of puberty and adolescence that you would expect. And it deals with those things with humor, with darkness and bleakness and awkwardness, with a lot of the emotions you would expect. There's one particular scene that involves Ren and Kathy that is incredibly awkward. And I could imagine some readers finding it very darkly funny, maybe relatable, and others getting very uncomfortable with it and even triggered by it. I can see it going both of those ways. It involves Ren around the age of 13, and again, this is really early in the novel. She's 13, and very late in the evening the night before, Ren got her first period. Her mother helps her, talks her through it, and helps her insert a tampon. Now it's the next day. Ren is in a bathroom stall at the pool. She's due to do a bit of swimming practice. and she needs to insert a new tampon, but she doesn't know how. She's struggling to do it. She's freaking out. And it's a really graphic scene about her having blood on her hands. Kathy comes along, asks if she's okay, and Ren begs Kathy for help, pulls her into the stall. There's this great bit of descriptive dialogue talking about the way that it feels as though Ren is absorbing Kathy. She pulls her into the stall so they are face to face in this close quarters environment, and Ren begs Kathy to do whatever it takes to help her figure out how to insert this thing. It's awkwardly hilarious, but kind of bleak. You really feel sorry for her. It's painfully cringe, but there is an undeniably humorous element to it that some people will laugh at and others definitely won't. It speaks to puberty. It speaks to change. It speaks to adolescence. It speaks to desperation and confusion and fear. So many aspects of teenagehood. And I absolutely love that scene for the emotional power that it had, for the awkwardness, for the fear that it conveyed. All of these things are so relatable to teenagers as their bodies change and grow, maybe in ways they like and are excited about, and maybe ways that they really aren't happy about and are afraid of. And that's just one scene. There are a lot of other aspects of puberty and teenagehood that get explored here, especially when it comes to sexual relationships, when it comes to romance, when it comes to interacting with boys, when it comes to the fact that Kathy is definitely gay, and because Ren never commits to the idea of them being together, it's as though Kathy has no other option. There are no other girls, there is only Ren. And not just because she's so romantically attached to Ren, but also because coming out as any kind of queer is terrifying, and if there are no other girls around to whom she can confess her feelings, or at least express herself, she feels closed off, she feels at the end of her rope. Ren was the choice. And I remember what that feels like when you're a teenager, where your choices are limited, where your world is small. I was so amazed by how that feeling was captured. And there are other even darker aspects to the novel as well. Take, for example, Jim. Jim is the swimming coach. And Ren remarks in the narrative about how Jim was never out and out creepy in a way that you could call him out, in a way that would get him in trouble, would get him fired, would get him investigated. He liked touching, but never in a way that was arguably predatory. He was careful. And Ren likes and respects Jim. He's very, very dedicated to competition. He's dedicated to these girls and them achieving their goals and winning medals, etc. So she respects him, but she points out to us the ways in which he behaves walk a very thin line. And there's an element of confusion there. There's an element of not understanding what trust means and where your trust should be placed. This is a book that really, really explores teenagehood in so many amazing ways. The relationships between teenagers, their relationships to their own bodies, their relationships to the adults in the room, the caretakers, the people who are responsible for them. There's a lot going on here. And then, of course, you've got this mermaid narrative. We know, it's not a spoiler, that Ren is going to become a mermaid somehow. Now, the author, Jade Song, uses they-them pronouns, and so I can assume that they identify as non-binary, and therefore, what I take away from this, also as a trans person myself, is that this mermaid transformation is about gender awakening, is about self-discovery in a chemical, mental, physical, emotional way. The idea that your body is not quite complete, that it doesn't quite sit right, that it doesn't mesh with your brain, it doesn't mesh with your internal truth and what you know to be right. It's a trans narrative in that way. Growing up, going through adolescence, puberty is happening to you, you're dealing with it, you're handling it with a strong stomach and a set jaw, you're handling it, but it's not quite right. And at the back of her mind, Ren knows that she's actually a mermaid and it will happen. She will find a way to become a mermaid. It's about transness. But for cisgender readers as well, it's still hugely relatable. The idea that you haven't quite figured yourself out yet, and it could be in minor ways, the ways that you aesthetically present yourself publicly. It could be in large ways, the things that you're studying, the things you've dedicated yourself to, the people you're surrounded by, the hobbies that you have, the place that you live, the things you study, the job you're aiming to get. All of these things might not sit right and you need to rethink things, figure things out, figure yourself out, your thoughts, your beliefs, your politics. So this is very broadly relatable in so many ways, but I would argue it's an intensely transgender narrative specifically. Self-discovery in a more physical way. And I should say that there are elements of body horror later in the book, but I won't go into any specifics. As someone who went through a lot of crises as a teenager and at the time didn't have a clue why, I just didn't like certain aspects of my life, of my body, and now it's all very clear to me as a trans woman. I get what I was going through, I just didn't at the time. I find this very, very relatable. Even the more dark and physically bleak aspects of it, I feel it in my bones. I'm so impressed by this narrative and the way that sapphic relationships, friendships, mother-daughter relationships, personal growth, exploration, competition, confusion, fear, hatred, self-hatred, all these things are explored so well in Chlorine. It's a really, really cool read. Not always easy, but I would say rewarding and worthwhile. An incredible coming-of-age story that is doing entirely new things to the coming-of-age genre, if it is one. A beautifully, aggressively queer narrative that I would argue is a beautiful trans allegory. Maybe beautiful's not the right word, but certainly poignant and relatable and raw. I'm so impressed. So check out Chlorine. It's real good. And go listen to 21 Pilots. Subscribe for books.